January 2021. A cold, dry air enveloped the forgotten Boynton Canyon, more than 10 miles from Sedona, Arizona. The light from the two hikers' flashlights pierced through the layers of red dust accumulated over many years, illuminating something no one was supposed to see. Control, we need support at Boynton Canyon, and send field investigators immediately. Their voices echoed faintly among the silent rock walls, as if swallowed whole by the desert. What began as an ordinary hiking trip had now become something entirely different. Something that would answer the questions haunting Arizona for 12 years. A set of skeletal remains hidden under a shallow layer of soil, and right beside it, a torn piece of fabric identical to the one Claire Marlowe had described on the night her husband, Ethan, vanished from Red Mesa in 2009. For more than a decade, Ethan's disappearance had been nothing but unanswered questions. A young, reserved man stepping out of his cabin in the desert on a winter evening and never returning. An empty chair at every holiday. A bedroom Claire could never bring herself to close. Before continuing this shocking story, take a second to hit subscribe and like the video. Your support helps bring forgotten cases back into the light, and the algorithms will ensure you don't miss any stories in the future. The discovery at Boynton Canyon was not just the end of a missing person case. It was the first domino in a chain of events that would expose secrets buried for years in the Arizona desert. Because when authorities finally identified the suspect in the reinvestigation, it wasn't a drifter or a nameless shadow, it was someone the Sedona community knew. Someone they trusted, someone who had lived among them for more than 10 years, carrying this horrifying secret. The Marlowe case is not just a mystery solved. It is a testament to the perseverance of a family that never stopped searching, detectives who refused to let files gather dust, and advances in forensic science that gave voice back to long-silenced victims. It is also the story of a community once torn apart. When Ethan went missing in 2009, suspicion spread through Red Mesa like a desert wind sweeping over every rooftop. Neighbors eyed each other warily, friends stopped talking. The search for Ethan exposed the simmering cracks beneath the surface of small-town American life. Those cracks would split wide open when the truth was finally revealed after more than a decade. What makes this case particularly haunting is that the answer was always so close. The suspect had been interviewed in the initial investigation, but slipped through. For years, this person attended Ethan's memorials, looking straight into Claire's and the Marlowe family's eyes, maintaining an air of calm innocence while concealing a secret no one could imagine. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I'm always curious how far these stories travel and how they connect us. Tonight, we'll go back to 2009, trace the search for answers that lasted over a decade, and uncover the stunning twist that brought one of Arizona's coldest cases back into the light. This is a story of loss, perseverance, deception, and ultimately justice delayed, but never denied. Sedona, Arizona, summer 2009, the red desert stretched out under a silent night sky, massive sandstone formations casting shadows over the hardened land around the isolated home, called Red Mesa Sanctuary. The residence of Ethan and Claire Marlowe stood completely detached from the nearest residential area, a considerable drive from town, accessible only by narrow dirt roads and stretches of red dust. The terrain around the property was rugged, a mix of sand, gravel, and low vegetation, easily disorienting anyone who stepped beyond familiar ground at night. Ethan had lived there long enough to understand the harsh nature of this land. Temperatures dropped quickly after sunset, winds blew strongly from narrow valleys, and nights were often so quiet that only the sound of rolling pebbles or small animals moving could be heard. It was under these conditions, on an evening that was completely ordinary for this reclusive couple, that Ethan stepped out of the sprawling four-sided house, crossed the compacted dirt yard, and gradually headed toward the hills to the west. There were no immediate signs of anything unusual. By habit, Ethan occasionally left the house to get some air and walk a bit when he couldn't sleep. Claire didn't pay much attention when she heard the door close in the distance, as this had happened before, and usually lasted only a short time. But this time, as more time passed than usual, and Ethan didn't return, the silence around the house became strange. Claire checked the rooms, stepped out into the open yard, called Ethan's name a few times, and received only the desert's echo in response. Unease grew when she discovered everything in the house was intact, with no indication that Ethan had prepared to go far or taken any items. She contacted Vargas, the property manager, hoping he had seen Ethan pass by the stables or around the outbuildings, but Vargas replied that he hadn't seen Ethan since early evening and hadn't heard any unusual sounds. Anxiety escalated quickly, prompting Claire to ask a few others in the area to check the nearby dirt roads, Ethan's familiar exit paths, and the boundary with the trail. But all efforts proved fruitless. No one found any sign that Ethan was still in the area. The complete loss of contact, combined with the terrain's disorienting nature at night, made Claire realize the situation was beyond her ability to handle alone. Unable to locate Ethan, or find any trace within their reachable range, Claire decided to report to the Coconino County Law Enforcement Agency that her husband had gone missing in the night, under unclear circumstances. The missing person report call from Claire Marlowe was routed to the Coconino County Sheriff's Office line during the night shift, when on-duty personnel were still handling routine situations like traffic accidents or minor disturbances in town. The information, a man left his home in the middle of the night in a remote desert area and didn't return, immediately caught the dispatcher's attention, as the geography of Sedona and the surrounding Red Rock valleys always posed high risks for anyone walking at night. After receiving preliminary information, the dispatcher activated the Missing Person Wilderness Risk Protocol, which required faster processing than a standard urban missing person report. To establish the initial case file, standard questions were asked: the victim's age, recent health status, any medical history, height, weight, last seen clothing, behavior or mental state in the days prior to disappearance, and places he frequented around the property. Claire provided the basic details: Ethan Marlowe, 32 years old, in good physical health, no mobility limiting conditions, though he sometimes had insomnia. There were no serious abnormal signs before he left the house. She described their isolated lifestyle, that Ethan was familiar with the property, but didn't often venture far at night. The location of Red Mesa Sanctuary was also noted, deep within a large private land area, a considerable distance from the nearest main road, surrounded by unpredictable terrain of rock, mixed with sand, and many steep ledges forming natural steps that were hard to see in the dark. The dispatcher assessed the potential danger based on two factors: the time Ethan had been gone without contact, and the desert night environment that could cause disorientation quickly. The failure to find Ethan in the family's own search and the unusually prolonged time further increased the priority. After completing the standard information gathering and initial risk assessment, the case was filed under the code Adult Missing, Wilderness Exposure, a classification requiring medium to high response due to the risk of the victim encountering an incident or becoming lost in the desert environment. With this classification, law enforcement immediately proceeded to the next step in the protocol, dispatching a patrol team to the scene to establish the initial search perimeter. When the first patrol team reached Red Mesa Sanctuary and began recording on-site factors, their priority was to determine the last known point based on direct observation combined with statements from Claire and property staff. Since Ethan was last seen leaving the main yard area and heading toward the western hills, police marked the edge of the yard, where the compacted soil transitioned to rocky sand terrain, as the official LKP. From there, they conducted a quick sweep of the surrounding area to detect any signs of movement or surface changes that could help outline the direction of travel. However, tracing the initial path was difficult because the area lacked clear trails. Low vegetation, gravel, and fractured sandstone slabs created a surface without specific identifying marks, making light footprints easily erased. Assessing environmental factors became the core of the search plan. Police considered the rapid temperature changes between night and dawn, frequent west-southwest winds creating swirls on the sand surface, and the rock-sand composition that could cause a walker to veer off course in minutes. Topographic maps were expanded to evaluate high-risk points, areas sloping down to small crevices between low rock walls, slanted rocks prone to slipping, rock hollows that could conceal someone if they fell or lost consciousness, and wide fractured ground sections deep enough to cause injury if fallen into in the dark. In addition to natural factors, the possible travel range was determined based on Ethan's physical condition and habits, a person who regularly walked the grounds but didn't habitually go far at night. This helped narrow the initial estimate of how far he might have gone in the time from leaving the house until Claire noticed his absence. Based on these analyses, the search team divided the area into 3 concentric zones, the inner zone within 0.5 miles of the LKP, the middle zone expanding to a 1-2 mile radius, and the outer zone extending to trails leading to Boynton Canyon and Dry Creek Basin. Each zone was assigned search lines in a clockwise pattern to ensure no detail was missed. The zoning followed the principle of high probability zones for the inner area and terrain hazard zones for the outer, balancing the likelihood of voluntary movement with the risk of accident. The initial search plan required coordination with Coconino County's SAR team. The supervisor sent a call-out to the night SR team, including personnel experienced in desert searches and mixed rock terrain. At the same time, a K-9 unit was prepared, aimed at tracking scent from the LKP. However, police noted that strong winds and dry ground could significantly affect scent retention. Support vehicles like ATVs, a light truck carrying equipment, and high-powered lighting were allocated to the inner search zone to accelerate progress. Meanwhile, a topographic mapping team was tasked with creating a detailed map of the entire area overnight, using existing county terrain data and marking priority points for field scanning. This team was also responsible for recording wind direction, ground fracture levels, and any factors that could affect determining Ethan's path. Additionally, continuous communication with the command center was maintained to update new information, adjust the search perimeter, and request additional personnel as needed. Once all initial assessments were complete and teams were assigned specific tasks, the official search plan was activated, marking the transition from the report intake phase to the organized field deployment phase in the first hours after Ethan Marlowe was reported missing. The Level 1 search plan was deployed immediately after the teams were assigned, focusing entirely on the area within the close radius of Red Mesa Sanctuary, according to the immediate vicinity principle, meaning every area within reasonable walking distance of the victim, in a few minutes from the time he left the house, had to be swept first. The SR team split into multiple small groups, each responsible for a subzone marked on the topographic map prepared the previous night, starting from the compacted dirt yard surrounding the house, then fanning out in the highest probability directions based on the direction Ethan was recorded walking by Claire. Within this range, the primary objective was to find physical signs clear enough to identify the direction of movement or any unusual situation. Because at close distances, the likelihood of residual traces, even small ones, remained higher than in farther areas where wind and changes in the ground surface could erase them. The first team checked the flat ground around the main yard, where the compacted soil and fine sand often left shoe prints or drag marks if someone had passed through. However, the ground was currently quite intact, with only a few footprints mixed in with the boot marks of staff who moved around the area daily. The group recorded the new marks, but could not clearly determine whose they were due to the lack of a shoe sample from Ethan at the time he left the house. A few dozen meters from the yard, the SR team observed an area of slightly disturbed ground, but upon close inspection, it was traces of coyote digging from the previous night, not human marks. Another group headed toward the low rock strip right next to the house, where the sandstone surface often created small cracks and could retain scratch or scuff marks if someone touched it. They found a few very thin abrasion marks on the rock surface, but these marks were too old and unrelated to the time of disappearance. The low boulders to the north of the house were checked further, as a person walking in the dark could slip, but there were no signs of a recent fall or slide. Meanwhile, the group moved eastward to the area with low vegetation, including sagebrush and yucca bushes. Under daylight, they swept the open ground between the bushes for footprints or drag marks. Some sections of soil had slight depressions, but when comparing size and shape, they were most likely animal tracks from small creatures. The search team noted them but did not consider them leads. At the southern edge of the house area, near the vehicle parking and storage zone, the team checked the intersections between compacted dirt roads and natural sand layers. These were locations likely to retain the newest shoe prints. However, what they found was mostly ATV tire tracks and staff boot prints from daily movement around the property. To rule out the possibility that Ethan entered any auxiliary structures on the property, the SAR team checked the storage sheds, empty livestock pens, water tanks, and paths behind the technical area. There were no signs of break-in or disturbed items. In the storage shed, windows, doors, and racks were all intact, showing no indication that anyone had entered since the previous night. After several hours of sweeping the entire closest area, the SR team determined there were no clear traces indicating Ethan was around the house. This forced them to carefully consider environmental factors that could have erased traces. Night winds, low humidity, and a thin layer of dust easily blown away had caused potential footprints to fade faster than usual. This was a familiar factor in desert conditions, but still posed significant challenges in determining the initial direction of movement. While continuing to rule out areas around the house, the SR team also noted that the terrain, though not completely flat, posed no significant danger in the close range. This reduced the likelihood that Ethan had an accident right near the house, forcing the investigation team to shift attention farther out to the transitional lands between the property and natural trails. No animal gathering points or surface changes were found that could suggest the victim collapsed or was injured in the close area. The coordination group concluded that the search radius needed to be expanded due to the possibility that Ethan had moved far beyond the safe range in the time Claire did not notice his absence. This information was sent back to the command center to prepare for the range expansion phase, meaning the Level 1 search results yielded no significant discoveries, forcing law enforcement to shift to a larger-scale search plan to determine the victim's next direction of movement. When the Level 1 search range around the house yielded no clear results, the on-site command team decided to activate the expansion phase, focusing on natural trails and the most reasonable movement directions based on terrain and Ethan's travel habits. From the LKP, 3 main directions were outlined: west toward gently sloping rock surfaces, extending down to a narrow valley, north connecting to a little-used small trail, and east-southeast, where flat land areas were interspersed with bushes and rock debris. Each direction was assigned to a SAR group with the task of sweeping the ground, recording every disturbance point, and assessing whether it could be human traces or just the result of the environment or wildlife. In the west direction, the SR team discovered an area with disturbance signs on the ground surface, including light depressions extending a few meters and a smooth soil section that looked like it had been stepped on the previous night. However, when measuring size and checking depth, they determined it was most likely traces of a large animal moving through in the evening, possibly a mule deer or coyote, as the depressions lacked the geometric characteristics of shoe prints. Nevertheless, this area was still marked for further review due to its position on the axis Ethan might have traveled. In the north direction, the terrain shifted from fine soil to sandstone bedrock, with natural fractured steps. The group responsible for this area found a section of rock with a faint dark mark that could be friction rubbing. However, upon close examination, they could not determine when the mark formed, and since there were no related signs like displaced gravel or dragged ground, the friction mark was deemed insufficient for conclusion. Next, a more noteworthy point appeared as the group went deeper into the northern trail section, a small soil area dug up in a curved pattern. The team noted this could be a human footprint, partially erased by wind, but it could also be animal scratching. The unclear size and shape led to this area being marked for later analysis. The east-southeast direction yielded more complex signs. In a relatively flat soil area, SAR members found multiple overlapping depressions. A few of them had length and depth equivalent to human footprints, but the edge profiles were not sharp due to strong winds the previous night. Some prints were deeper, possibly from a person carrying heavy weight or a large animal. The SR team cordoned off this area of nearly 20 square meters, as the interwoven traces indicated some movement activity had occurred there close to the time of Ethan's disappearance. Additionally, the team found small stones displaced from their natural positions, mixed into the fresh soil layer. This could result from someone stepping over or slipping, but it could also just be a natural phenomenon when dry soil cracked and crumbled. With insufficient evidence, the SR group marked this location as a zone of interest for deeper analysis, using measurement tools and terrain map comparison. During the continued expansion, the search groups collected a total of 8 locations with ground disturbance signs or minor terrain changes that could not be immediately attributed. These included lightly depressed soil areas, sections with scratch or friction marks, some traces possibly shoe prints, but blurred by wind, and a few rock soil areas with unusual shapes. All were marked with colored stakes and GPS coordinates to report back to the command center. The coordination team compiled the suspect points and noted they clustered into 2 distinct groups, one along a possible Ethan movement path, and the other scattered in hard-to-explain directions. The inconsistent disturbance points forced the command team to prepare for the possibility that either Ethan had gone in one of these directions, or there was movement by someone else in the same time frame. However, no trace was strong enough to pinpoint a specific direction of movement. After completing the field report, the search force determined that the expanded range still yielded no direct discoveries about Ethan. The collected traces only reached the level of suspicion and were insufficient for clear orientation. Faced with this situation, the SR team decided to return and meticulously resweep each marked suspect location from the expansion search, and it was precisely in this detailed checking step that the first pieces of evidence began to appear more clearly, rather than just vague signs as before. In the east-southeast area, where the depressions and disordered soil streaks were identified earlier, a SAR member noticed a small piece of fabric caught in a shallow rock crevice, just a few centimeters off the ground. The fabric piece was small, not enough to determine what type of clothing it belonged to, but the material was thicker than the naturally degradable fabrics commonly seen in the desert. Its position in the rock crevice suggested it might have been pulled or scraped against the rough surface. Upon discovery, the SR member used specialized tweezers to collect the sample, placed it in a sealed nylon bag, and numbered it per protocol. GPS coordinates were recorded along with the collection time to synchronize with the field map. Then the team expanded the radius around the fabric piece by a few meters in a semicircle to check for any related traces. Just minutes later, they recorded a red rock dust area with a texture different from the surrounding ground. Instead of adhering evenly to the rock surface like natural dust, this area had displaced patches, forming a thin curved smear as if an object had been dragged over. The characteristic of Sedona rock dust is quite light and easily wind-blown, but in this area, the displaced dust still retained sharper edges than the adjacent ground, indicating possible impact in a time relatively close to Ethan's disappearance. The dust sample was collected using a soft brush and steel tray, then placed in a sample box for transfer to the technical lab for trace analysis. Subsequent observations by the ECR team showed that to the west of the dust discovery point, a small object reflected light when the team shone a flashlight on it. Upon approaching, they realized it was a plastic sports water bottle cap, the common type sold at local supermarkets. This cap was about 5–6 meters from the fabric piece, not caked with mud or wet soil, but only dusted with a thin layer. The cap lying alone without the bottle made the ECR team consider it a possible item dropped during movement. Although this evidence could not immediately be confirmed as Ethan's, the ECR team still secured it per standard protocol due to its appearance in an area with consecutive disturbance signs. Following these scattered but spatially related discoveries, the Field Command Team drafted a summary report to synchronize all evidence. All evidence was numbered, photographed at the scene, logged into the recording system, and transferred to the Technical Analysis Unit in Flagstaff. A copy of the scene file was sent to the Center for Archiving to cross-reference later with advanced search data. After collecting the evidence, the ECR team was required to make a preliminary assessment of the relevance between them and the victim's possible direction of movement. Based on the positions of the fabric piece and bottle cap, both pieces of evidence lay on the east-southeast axis, which was one of the feasible but lower priority directions initially, since Ethan rarely went this way. However, the simultaneous appearance of multiple disturbance signs in the same small area forced the search team to reconsider the priority of this direction. The fabric caught in the rock crevice suggested the possibility of someone passing with clothing or an item snagging on the rough surface. The bottle cap a few meters away suggested it fell during movement, though uncertain if due to collision, slip, or intentional drop. Meanwhile, the displaced rock dust in a low wind impact position made human mechanical movement more likely. Each piece of evidence alone was insufficient, but their clustering in the same location led the ECR team to hypothesize that some movement activity had occurred there close to when Ethan left the house. Immediately after, the search range was adjusted to expand coverage of the east-southeast axis rather than maintaining the initial broad sweep. The on-site coordination group updated the search map by connecting the evidence points into a projected line, thereby proposing deeper sweeps into the lowlands adjacent to large bushes and gentle rock faces. Within the SAR team, a question arose: do these pieces of evidence belong to Ethan, and if not, could they indicate the presence of another person at the same time? Although no clear answer yet, the command team still viewed this as a critical turning point, because even small evidence created a geographically cohesive data cluster, a factor extremely rare in the early hours of a desert search. The evidence discovery also necessitated sweeping secondary lines in this axis, especially inclined rock surfaces and small rock crevices where traces could be obscured or items could snag. The data collection group expanded the survey range by a few hundred meters east-southeast and marked an additional 4 locations with minor rock surface changes. But their relevance still needed verification through later technical analysis. When synthesizing the end-of-day results, the SR team concluded that the southeast axis, which had only been considered a secondary direction, has now become a high-potential area for both possibilities: the victim moving on his own or being influenced by external factors and move through the area. With this assessment, and after completing the collection of physical evidence in the field, the command team moved to the next step, analyzing potential movement directions to build the most reasonable model of the path Ethan might have taken from the time he left the house until all traces became faint. This process was based on 3 main data sources: the victim's daily movement habits, the terrain characteristics of each direction from the last known point, and Ethan's physical capability in desert nighttime conditions. First, the investigation team gathered information from Claire and Vargas about the directions Ethan usually chose when walking around the property. According to them, Ethan rarely went southeast because that area was rugged, with lots of bushes and loose rocks, while the west and north directions had flatter, easier ground. However, the evidence was found in the southeast, forcing the analysis team to consider the possibility that Ethan had deviated from his familiar path for an unusual reason or due to disorientation in the dark. They also noted that Ethan was in good physical condition and often walked to alleviate restlessness from insomnia, but he did not carry support tools like a headlamp or trekking pole in the evening, reducing his ability to travel far in limited light conditions. Based on these factors, the SAR team reconstructed 3 potential movement routes using map modeling: the first route westward, where the terrain was flatter; the second northward, leading to low rock areas; and the third southeast, where the evidence had just been found. Each route was evaluated on a scoring scale based on the degree of fit between the victim's characteristics and the context of the disappearance night. The west route offered the highest reasonableness if considering habits and terrain. However, this route showed no evidence whatsoever, nor any ground disturbance consistent with the disappearance time frame. The north route had clear terrain advantages, but the absence of new traces reduced its likelihood. In contrast, the southeast route, though not a natural choice for Ethan, matched the evidence findings. The analysis team determined that if Ethan went this way on his own, there must have been a motivating factor beyond habit, such as an unusual noise, a feeling of needing to move to avoid some subjective discomfort, or disorientation right after stepping out of the yard. If the hypothesis of Ethan moving voluntarily is correct, the distance he could cover in the initial 20-30 minutes would not exceed 1.5 miles in dark conditions, and he likely fell into a folded terrain area where slipping or getting stuck was easy without emitting a clear signal. However, given the cluster of evidence within a close radius, the analysis team observed that a victim's movement model, if voluntary, would tend to leave a continuous path, while the current traces only appeared in clusters with distances between points not forming a coherent line. This opened up the second possibility. The victim did not move on his own, but was transported through this area, causing the traces to appear scattered rather than in a continuous chain. To strengthen the analysis, the group evaluated terrain factors to eliminate physically unreasonable directions. The west, though easy to traverse, had an open slope leading down to a valley where if Ethan fell, SAR could have detected traces in Phase 1. Since nothing was found, this direction's priority was reduced. The north consisted of many flat rock surfaces where slipping or impact would typically leave friction marks on the rock, but SAR only found overly old faint scratches, so this direction's relevance also decreased. In contrast, the southeast had complex terrain with many shallow rock crevices, interspersed low bushes, and uneven ground, very prone to unusual traces when a person or object passed through. This matched the evidence distribution. On this basis, the analysis group identified high-risk areas to focus on first: the low ground right after the fabric piece discovery point, where the ground suddenly dropped 40-60 centimeters. Second, the cluster of rock crevices extending along the southeast slope, likely to retain items or mechanical traces. And third, the larger bush strip deeper along this axis, where it could easily conceal a person in case the victim fell or lay motionless. These were the three prioritized areas because they combined dangerous terrain factors with the presence of evidence. In addition to the three high-risk areas, the SCR team also delineated two auxiliary areas based on environmental assessment: the inclined rock surface near the evidence group and the farther cracked dry land area, where human footprints could be quickly erased by wind but still leave slight surface deformation. When synthesizing the conclusions, the command team agreed that the southeast became the primary direction to continue expanding the search. Although there was still a chance the victim went in another direction, all valuable field evidence was concentrated in this axis. The plan was adjusted. The southeast area would be scanned deeper, focusing on risk points and the spaces between them to determine whether the recently collected evidence was merely scattered traces or part of a movement chain directly related to Ethan Marlowe's disappearance. While the SCR team continued adjusting the search scope toward the southeast based on evidence and terrain analysis, the investigation unit handling information proceeded to synthesize initial statements from those present or directly related to the victim before Ethan disappeared, to build a human data foundation for cross-referencing with field developments. Claire Marlowe provided the first statement, describing the evening before Ethan left the house as one without any clear unusual signs. According to Claire, Ethan seemed tired from prolonged insomnia, but showed no actions or words indicating he intended to leave the house at night. She remembered Ethan going into the living room for a while, then stepping out to the yard, as he did when needing fresh air to feel better, and a few minutes later, Claire heard no more sounds. When Claire realized Ethan wasn't returning, she searched for him in the property, but found no signs he had returned to the house to grab any items. Claire emphasized that Ethan had no habit of going far from the house at night and usually moved only in close range, leading her to conclude that his absence for such a long time was completely abnormal. After Claire's statement, the investigation unit moved to Vargas, the property manager, and the person living closest to Ethan's main activity area. Vargas said he did not encounter Ethan all evening and heard no notable sounds before Claire called him. However, when asked in more detail about the last time he heard footsteps or door opening-closing at night, Vargas only provided vague information and could not give an exact timeline. He described the house area as usually quiet in the evening and that he was in the auxiliary area, not observing the main yard. The investigation unit noted that, although Vargas's statement did not directly contradict Claire's, the information gap he provided was quite large, not helping to determine anyone's activity on the property when Ethan left. Besides Vargas, another occasional employee on the property was questioned about any strange activity before the disappearance. This person confirmed not meeting Ethan all day and hearing no unusual sounds. However, he mentioned seeing moving light far off the property at night, but could not determine if it was vehicle lights, handheld lights, or reflections from another residential area. This statement led the investigation unit to note for cross-referencing with the movement direction identified by CRA, especially since the light was seen in the direction matching the southeast axis. To complete the picture of related factors, the investigation unit moved to collect statements from those involved in the victim's financial matters, the most important being Victor Sandoval, Ethan's asset manager. Sandoval stated he had no contact with Ethan that evening and was even at home in Cottonwood when the incident occurred. When asked about their recent working relationship, Sandoval described Ethan as cautious with finances but mentioned no tensions or disputes between them. However, when asked to provide the last time he met Ethan before that, Sandoval gave information not fully matching Claire's record of an exchange related to financial funds, prompting the investigation unit to note this detail for further review. Besides Sandoval, the investigation unit also preliminarily interviewed several individuals involved in Ethan's recent financial transactions, including a bank employee and an accountant handling paperwork. Both confirmed that Ethan had made some requests related to adjusting or redirecting part of his assets in the days close to the disappearance. However, the statements about the timing of these requests and how Ethan sent the instructions did not fully match the timeline Sandoval provided for the transactions he handled. When synthesizing all statements, the investigation unit saw increasingly clear inconsistencies. Claire affirmed Ethan showed no signs of wanting to leave the house far at night, while Vargas could not confirm any movement in the area when Ethan disappeared. The auxiliary employee reported strange light toward the southeast, a direction Ethan rarely went, and Sandoval's statement about recent financial transactions did not fully align with bank records or descriptions from others involved. These small discrepancies did not form direct evidence, but were signs of inconsistency in events, leading the investigation unit to assess that the picture of activities of those around Ethan before the disappearance still had many gaps. As the SR team and investigation unit proceeded to expand the search scope based on potential movement directions and initial statements, a subunit responsible for scanning farther north-northeast reported a significant discovery. Ethan Marlowe's pickup truck was found parked in a natural lot several miles from the main house, on the edge of the transition area leading to a larger trail system. The truck's appearance in such a distant area immediately raised questions because, according to Claire, Ethan did not leave the house by vehicle that disappearance evening, and had no reason to drive out at that late hour. When the team approached the vehicle, they noted the parking position was quite unusual. The truck was not headed toward the property entrance as per Ethan's habit, but parked at an angle to the dirt road, with the front wheels slightly sunk into the soft soil at the lot's edge. There were no signs of collision or obvious damage on the body, but the dust layer on the body and windows indicated the vehicle had not been in this position long. The dust was thin and even, without strong wind erosion signs. This reinforced the possibility that the truck was brought here in the time near or right after Ethan's disappearance. Upon closer inspection, The investigation unit discovered soil stuck under the chassis and in the wheel wells with multiple layers, one layer of red dust characteristic of the area around Red Mesa Sanctuary, but beneath it was a darker layer with crumbly texture containing mineral particles typical of the Cottonwood area or nearby regions with different soil composition. This was a sign that the vehicle may have been moved through different geological areas after leaving the property, but it did not match the location where the truck was found, as that area's soil was completely different, paler with a fine sandy texture typical of dry rocky lots. This led to the conclusion that the truck was driven here from elsewhere rather than abandoned at the journey's starting point. Cross-referencing this soil type with geological maps helped the investigation unit rule out the possibility that Ethan drove himself here. Soil samples were collected and sealed, and SAR also noted that the trail leading to the parking lot had no new tire tracks corresponding to the disappearance time frame, as existing marks had been blurred by wind to the point of unidentifiable timing. This further increased suspicion that the truck may have been brought here during strong wind periods or via a route leaving fewer clear marks. Inside the vehicle, police noted many important details. The driver's seat was pulled back farther than Ethan's usual position, the steering wheel cleaner than expected if Ethan had driven in dusty night conditions. Other surfaces in the vehicle had natural fine dust, but a few areas on the dashboard had light wiping marks, not matching Ethan's usual cleaning style. Moreover, no items or notes were found indicating Ethan intended to go to this area, making the truck a major question mark. The floor had fine beige sand, not part of the soil near the victim's home, nor matching the discovery area. The investigation unit temporarily concluded the truck had passed through at least 2 different geological areas after leaving Red Mesa, with the current position only the final stop. Additionally, the investigation team checked the door lock system and noted no signs of forced entry. The locks were intact, indicating the driver used a valid key or matching set. This raised the question, if Ethan did not drive the truck out of the house, who had the key? When checking around the lot, SAR found no clear additional footprints, except a few faint ones that could not be identified. No other dropped items near the vehicle, and the ground showed no collision, dragging, or sudden stop. However, a small section of ground a few meters from the truck had disturbance like someone turning around or standing and pivoting for a while. This mark was noted, but insufficient for conclusion. The entire vehicle analysis showed most data did not match the possibility of Ethan moving on his own. The mismatch between soil on the wheels, parking direction, and location led the investigation unit to strongly lean toward the hypothesis that the truck was operated by someone else after Ethan left the house. This also aligned with prior movement direction analysis, which showed collected traces insufficient to form any reasonable route Ethan could have taken on his own to the truck's position. While the field team continued strengthening hypotheses related to movement, the financial investigation unit was tasked with fully reviewing Ethan Marlowe's asset situation, as Sandoval's inconsistent statements and unusual fund movements close to the disappearance date indicated finances could be a related factor. Accessing bank records, investment reports, and internal asset fund archives was done prioritarily to determine if the victim was preparing for a major change or involved in any financial dispute. Through screening, the investigation unit discovered that about 2 weeks before the disappearance, Ethan had submitted a request to restructure part of his reserve fund, including reallocating a significant amount away from the portfolio directly managed by Sandoval. Bank records showed transactions signed electronically per procedure, but the signing time and Sandoval's reporting time to the technical finance department did not fully match. A few transactions were recorded as executed by Sandoval later than Ethan's requested deadline, causing delays in asset allocation. When cross-referencing data from the bank and asset management company, the finance unit noticed 2 internal financial reports edited by changing investment category priorities. This was not enough to conclude misconduct, but raised suspicion that Sandoval may have adjusted content to protect his interests when fund control was threatened. More notably, in an automatically archived bank email, Ethan had inquired about the process to fully separate part of the fund into an independent account, not requiring the manager's co-approval signature. Although this email showed no direct dispute, it confirmed Ethan was considering narrowing Sandoval's role. This became important when placed against Sandoval's statement, who previously claimed their working relationship was completely stable with no changes. A bank employee also said Ethan had requested a direct meeting to clarify asset separation terms, but the meeting was canceled close to the date at Sandoval's request, as no longer necessary. This contradicted documents Ethan sent, where he still wanted to proceed with fund restructuring. The investigation unit assessed this inconsistency as a sign requiring deeper review. Additionally, a series of small-value but high-frequency transactions in the days right before Ethan's disappearance was noted. These were executed from the fund's subsidiary account, not Ethan's personal account, and approved through Sandoval's management system. The analysis unit had not yet determined the purpose of these transactions, but they noted Ethan had never mentioned similar expenditures in prior financial reports. When comparing with Sandoval's schedule in those days, investigators found the times he claimed for client meetings or file handling did not fully align with transaction execution times, creating small but notable professional discrepancies. All data was compiled into a financial timeline diagram, allowing the investigation unit to see clearer changes in Ethan's asset management behavior. A prominent trend, Ethan had begun narrowing Sandoval's control, specifically by shifting investments to independent portfolios or restructuring approval rights. These moves, if completed, would directly impact Sandoval's role and benefits in managing the fund. This was a factor the investigation unit assessed as potentially creating motive in the context of the victim's unexplained disappearance. The investigation unit also reviewed information from individuals involved in Ethan's financial operation. An accountant handling reports confirmed Ethan had requested re-verification of many detailed items Sandoval submitted, including small but regular discrepancies over time. For the investigation unit, this indicated Ethan might have been suspecting fund operations, though the severity of these suspicions was unclear. When synthesizing all financial data, investigators assessed this as not just background information, but a critical investigation branch. The inconsistencies in Sandoval's statements, combined with the marked change in Ethan's asset management, elevated financial factors as a motive worth serious consideration in the context of the disappearance. From this assessment, as the investigation team compiled all data gathered from the scene, physical evidence, witness statements, and initial financial analysis, they were compelled to revisit every step taken in early 2009 to evaluate the completeness and reliability of the case file. When compared to standard protocols for disappearances involving risk factors, they identified significant limitations that caused potential leads to be underexplored from the outset. First, some evidence collected in the initial days of the disappearance, particularly soil samples, rock dust, and small dropped items in the suspect area, was not fully analyzed due to technical constraints at the time. The 2009 forensics lab lacked advanced trace analysis technology, resulting in soil and dust samples being recorded only with general descriptions, without mineral cross-referencing or anything beyond basic identification by color and texture. This prevented the evidence from being precisely linked to specific locations, leading to inaccurate assessments of movement direction. Second, the team noted clear errors in handling data from cell phone tower stations. At the time of Ethan's disappearance, cell tower triangulation was used in some cases, but the analysis process was rudimentary and relied heavily on manual estimates. Records showed that the last signal from Ethan's phone was picked up by a northern tower, but this data was dismissed as unreliable due to weak signal strength. However, standards at the time failed to account for how vast desert areas could cause signals to fluctuate in unusual directions. Instead of treating this data as a lead, the initial team set it aside without cross-referencing it with topographic maps or trail locations. This inadvertently eliminated one of the few rare indicators of movement direction. Third, there was no GPS data retrieval from vehicles associated with the victim or those around him. Even though some commercial trucks or work vehicles at the time were equipped with basic tracking devices, this was particularly relevant to the unusual appearance of Ethan's vehicle far from the home area, yet the initial team did not consider the possibility that other individuals' vehicles might have been moving in the area and affected the vehicle's location. Failing to check GPS histories from vehicles belonging to people connected to Ethan, including those of workers on the property or vehicles used for financial business, caused authorities to miss opportunities to identify anomalous travel routes during the disappearance timeframe. Fourth, the team noted that in the early days of handling the case, no search warrants were sought for locations or property belonging to related individuals, specifically financial manager Victor Sandoval. Since the case was still classified as an undetermined missing person at the time, authorities lacked sufficient legal grounds to proceed with searches. However, not inspecting the residences, workplaces, and vehicles of individuals closely connected to the victim significantly limited the ability to detect indirect traces, such as altered financial documents, related electronic devices, or soil samples on vehicles. Upon re-evaluating the full context, the investigation team concluded that the above limitations were not subjective errors, but primarily stemmed from technological and professional standards constraints in 2009. However, their consequence was that much critical information was not exploited at the right time, leaving the overall picture of Ethan Marlowe's disappearance fragmented, unsystematic, and lacking sufficient basis to conclude an accurate direction or the possibility of external influence on the victim. Recognizing these limitations helped the team understand the gaps needing supplementation in the file and laid the necessary foundation for a more comprehensive evaluation of remaining evidence in the subsequent review phase. After many days of deploying searches in all priority directions, the SR team and investigation unit compiled all results to reassess the feasibility of expanding the scope. The final report from the search forces indicated no direct traces leading to Ethan's location, beyond some scattered evidence insufficient to determine a specific scenario. Comprehensive sweeps from areas near the home to farther routes, including high-risk points and marked suspect zones, yielded no new discoveries. No signs of survival, movement signals, or additional personal items were found to confirm the victim was still within the search force's operational range. The east-southeast axis, despite having evidence, did not open any clear direction, and the remaining areas all showed surface traces erased too quickly by wind and geological features. Simultaneously, supplementary efforts, such as checking secondary trails, binocular scans from high points, and coordination with nearby residential areas within a large radius, also uncovered no relevant information. As all traces became vague and no biological indicators or physical signals proved the victim was in a specific area, the investigation team had to acknowledge the high likelihood that Ethan was no longer within the direct search perimeter. In reviewing the file, the most critical factor was the absence of a body or any injury signs to determine if the victim had an accident or was affected by criminal elements. Per operational regulations, a missing person case can only shift to criminal investigation if there are signs of criminal activity or a body is found confirming injuries. Since Ethan's disappearance met neither condition, the file could not be classified as homicide, nor as an accident, and certainly lacked grounds to accuse anyone. The official classification remained missing person, undetermined circumstances, and intermediate status preventing indefinite resource prioritization. With all field measures implemented to the maximum without results, investigators were forced to conclude that continuing the search was no longer feasible in that phase. The file was transferred to Coconino County's Cold Case Unit for storage and awaiting future new information. With this conclusion, Ethan Marlowe's disappearance case officially entered a deadlock phase, with no clear investigation direction, no continuous traces, and no evidence to determine if the victim was alive or deceased. Archiving the file as a cold case marked the point where the investigation force temporarily halted all field activities and shifted focus to preserving all related data for potential reopening upon new developments. In 2021, when Coconino County's Cold Case Unit reviewed its catalog of long-pending files to identify cases viable for reinvestigation with new technology, Ethan Marlowe's disappearance file was included in the reconsideration group. Detective Marcus Hale, experienced in handling long-dormant cases involving desert areas, was assigned to take over and evaluate the entire file. He approached the case with the view that most natural disappearances miss small details in the early phase due to technical limits or environmental conditions, so the first step was to focus on all collected evidence that had never been fully analyzed. Marcus spent many days re-examining each item in storage: fabric scraps, rock dust samples, a water bottle cap, and scattered soil samples recorded in 2009. These items had been preliminarily classified but lacked deep analysis, and crucially, had never been cross-referenced in a full space-time chain. Reviewing each report, he realized the evidence all lay along the same axis but had never been evaluated as a linked system. This opened a line of thinking that there might be a movement chain involving the victim or someone else in the area that night. In the process, Marcus also rechecked all topographic maps and SAR team notes, cross-referencing with scattered traces in the file to see if 2021 map analysis technology could reconstruct a model that the 2009 search team could not. What caught Marcus's attention was a detail once overlooked: the cell tower ping data from the night Ethan disappeared. Per old records, Ethan's phone signal was captured by a tower toward Cottonwood, but due to weak strength and insufficient for location, it was excluded from investigation directions then. However, Marcus knew 2009 signal analysis standards were far different from current technology. He requested the Coconino County Technical Analysis Department to review the original data. Experts used modern software capable of simulating wave propagation and interference by terrain. Simulation results showed Ethan's phone signal, though weak, was almost certainly captured on the north slope of the Cottonwood-Sedona route, matching the area where Ethan's vehicle was found. Previously, this coincidence was downplayed due to lack of advanced analysis, but now became a key point. This led Marcus to re-examine the full context. If the phone signal truly pointed to Cottonwood and the vehicle appeared in a similar direction, it could not be random coincidence. To expand analysis, he cross-referenced the cell ping with timeline data from scene reports, estimating when Ethan left home and when Claire reported him missing, while comparing possible routes between Red Mesa Sanctuary and Cottonwood. The picture began to clarify: a feasible movement route, not the victims, but of a vehicle related to the disappearance. Marcus continued with the financial file, an area considered secondary in 2009 due to insufficient evidence to turn finance into an investigative motive. Cross-referencing financial records with statement data, he realized the small discrepancies noted in Sandoval's declarations were not isolated anomalies, but could signal an ongoing financial conflict right before Ethan's disappearance. Ethan had indeed prepared to separate part of his assets from Sandoval's management, yet Sandoval omitted this in his 2009 statement and provided a timeline inconsistent with documents. Marcus compiled financial data and saw a flurry of transactions in the days immediately before the disappearance, putting the asset fund in an unusual adjustment state. Some investment items were converted without evidence of Ethan's direct approval, despite electronic signature records. This became more serious when Marcus compared transaction times with Sandoval's activity schedule and found overlaps, prompting consideration of third-party account interference. Not stopping there, Marcus checked 2009 personnel records, including Vargas's work schedule and auxiliary staff around the property. Some statements, once vague or unreliable, were now viewed anew: the strange light appearance east-southeast, Vargas's silence in the critical time frame, and mismatches in Sandoval's timeline points. Compiling these information segments, Marcus realized the disappearance picture was not simply a person leaving home and meeting an accident. The intersection of cell ping, vehicle location, field traces, and unusual financial activities formed a much clearer link to data chain than in 2009. Though not enough for a conclusion, these factors helped Marcus form a new hypothesis: that Ethan Marlowe's disappearance was not random and might involve human elements more than the investigating agency once thought. While Detective Marcus Hale was continuing to review the backlog data and forming new hypotheses about the possible involvement of human factors in Ethan Marlowe's disappearance, a completely unexpected piece of information ended more than 12 years of deadlock. A group of hikers reported discovering human skeletal remains in the Boynton Canyon area, several miles northwest of Red Mesa Sanctuary. The group stated that they were following a side branch of the trail, which is rarely used due to the steep terrain and dense brush, when one of the lead hikers spotted bone fragments exposed on the thin, eroded soil layer. Due to the location being in a hard-to-access area and not on common paths, the discovery was immediately noted as unusual. Local police and the crime scene investigation unit were dispatched right away, securing the area and conducting a controlled excavation. Upon approaching the scene, investigators observed that the skeletal remains were in a natural earthen hollow, about half a meter deep, beneath layers of dust, sand, and decayed leaves that had accumulated over time due to wind. The bone positioning was not in a natural posture typically seen in accidental deaths, but showed signs of being arranged or affected by external force before full decomposition. No personal items of the deceased were found nearby, but the technical team recovered a rotted leather belt fragment next to the skeleton, along with a small metal piece that could be the remnant of a belt buckle. These material fragments were collected according to protocol and cataloged immediately. Recognizing the significance of the discovery, Marcus Hale requested priority transport of the bones and evidence to the forensic analysis lab. Forensic specialists began DNA analysis using nuclear sequencing matching, utilizing Claire's DNA sample stored in the 2009 missing person file. Within just a few days, results confirmed the skeletal remains were indeed those of Ethan Marlowe. The identity confirmation shifted the case out of the unexplained disappearance category and into one requiring analysis of cause of death. The most challenging part of this process was assessing the bone condition after more than 10 years exposed to Arizona's dry heat and harsh climate fluctuations. However, many structural details remained sufficient for forensic experts to examine. During skeleton analysis, the forensic team noted several abnormal signs on the skull, a long crack running from the occipital region to the right side, with sharper crack edges than those typically seen in low-height falls. These cracks did not spread in the characteristic pattern of post-mortem impact, but bore features of a strong force applied to the skull while the victim was still alive or immediately before death. Additionally, two left-side ribs showed uneven healing fractures, indicating a strong impact that the body did not have time to recover from. Some small fragments were detached from the rib structure, possibly due to compression or direct collision. The forensic expert concluded that this injury was incompatible with a natural fall while hiking in the desert, as the Boynton Canyon area lacks significant slopes or high rock surfaces capable of causing such concentrated and angled impact injuries. These marks were more consistent with the victim sustaining a strong force from a solid object, such as impact with a tool or hard item. This discovery raised suspicions of assault, leading to death. However, the forensic team also noted that the body discovery location did not align with any logical movement direction of Ethan on the night he disappeared. Boynton Canyon is northwest of Red Mesa Sanctuary, completely opposite the east-southeast direction where initial activity-related evidence was found. Even if Ethan had gone off course, the route to Boynton Canyon would require crossing complex rock slopes and traversing areas with no recorded footprints or movement traces from 2009. This made the skeleton's discovery location suspicious. When cross-referencing the 2009 search map with the new location, Marcus Hale noted that Boynton Canyon had never been within the actual search perimeter, because at that time, there were no indications Ethan headed that way. If the victim died on the night of disappearance, the body was unlikely to appear at the newly discovered location on its own. Furthermore, the skeleton was in a natural earthen hollow, but not deep enough to fully conceal it without external intervention. The accumulation of dry leaves and dust could be due to wind and environment, but the bone positioning indicated some displacement, inconsistent with a natural death posture. Upon closer analysis, the scene team noted that the leg and pelvic bones were offset from the body's straight line, suggesting the body may have been dragged or repositioned after death. Surrounding debris also showed uneven ground compression, consistent with human intervention at some point before natural elements covered the body. Another key point was the geographic distance between the 2009 evidence and the 2021 body location. When connecting the points on a map, no logical movement route formed from where Ethan was last seen to Boynton Canyon. Even in a disorientation scenario, this trajectory remained illogical, as the victim would have to cross rugged terrain with continuous elevation changes without leaving any signs recorded during the 2009 Level 1 and Level 2 searches. This strongly inclined the investigation team toward the hypothesis that the body was not at the initial incident site, but had been moved to Boynton Canyon at an undetermined time. The skeleton's appearance after more than 10 years presented two possibilities. Either the body had been there from the start, but undetected due to search perimeter errors, or the body was moved after SAR operations ended. However, soil compression characteristics and bone arrangement lean toward the second possibility, as a body left in a natural posture from the beginning would show more symmetrical decomposition over time. The discovery location was also in a low-traffic area, explaining why it took over 10 years to find. Nonetheless, the large geographic separation between the 2009 evidence sites and the skeleton location ruled out natural death while lost. When synthesizing all forensic, terrain, and search context details, Detective Marcus Hale realized the case had exceeded a standard missing person file. The existence of injury marks on the skeleton, combined with the body appearing in a location inconsistent with any logical victim movement trajectory, created two elements meeting the criteria to shift the file from missing to criminal investigation. The body discovery at Boynton Canyon thus became the most critical turning point since 2009, forcing authorities to reevaluate the entire case from a potential crime perspective rather than accident or natural disappearance. After Ethan Marlowe's skeletal remains were confirmed and injury marks inconsistent with natural accident were documented, Detective Marcus Hale requested a completely new phase of scene analysis, applying modern forensic techniques unavailable in 2009. The goal of this phase was not only to reconstruct the area where the body was found, but more importantly, to identify the initial incident location where the victim was attacked or died, and analyze whether the evidence collected in the disappearance year truly belonged to the same event chain or had been misinterpreted due to prior technical limitations. The first stage of scene reconstruction involved using LiDAR technology combined with 3D terrain scanning to build a millimeter-accurate map of the Red Mesa Sanctuary area and the entire 2009 search axis. A specialist team from the State Investigation Office was deployed, bringing drone-mounted LiDAR scanning equipment to recreate terrain structure at high resolution. LiDAR data enabled simulation of rock ledges, crevices, gentle slopes and subsidence areas over time, providing information that the 2009 SAR team could only observe visually. When terrain layers were overlaid chronologically, previously overlooked areas, such as small depressions between bushes or fractured rock edges, emerged clearly as points where a person could be pushed, fall, or be dragged. Concurrent with 3D modeling, Marcus requested reanalysis of all soil and rock dust samples collected from the southeast area in Ethan's disappearance year. Using modern micromineral analysis techniques, lab specialists could precisely determine geological composition, including ratios of hematite, limonite, and quartz particles from each individual sample. The results were highly noteworthy. The rock dust on the fabric scrap and water bottle cap did not fully match Red Mesa soil, but showed signatures from the transitional zone between Red Mesa and Cottonwood Ridge, a region Ethan's natural movement direction would never pass through. When analyzing the fabric scrap using fiber testing and material degradation techniques, the lab confirmed the polyester fibers matched the type of light jacket Ethan typically wore for evening walks. The fiber rot level indicated the scrap was torn near the disappearance time, rather than from subsequent natural decay, reinforcing the possibility of tearing due to collision or strong pulling. The dust sample on the metal scrap from the southeast area contained microelements similar to rock dust from a narrow geological group near Cottonwood Ridge, immediately linking Marcus to the location where Ethan's vehicle was found in 2009. This match created a previously unrecorded geographic link. Not stopping there, the analysis team used spectroscopy to determine oxidation levels and particle adhesion on the fabric scrap. Results showed the dust on the scrap originated from two different locations, part from the Red Mesa area, part from the red soil with characteristic minerals of the Cottonwood-Boynton region, indicating the scrap traveled through multiple environments rather than just falling in place. Subsequently, the technical team shifted to building a movement model based on 3D data, evidence, and updated maps. When reconstructing the victim's possible movement timeline, the model showed Ethan could not have walked from Red Mesa to the southeast area and then to Boynton Canyon in the short time before disappearance. Rugged terrain, large distances, and lack of continuous traces all indicated this could not happen naturally. In the simulation model, if Ethan walked alone in the dark without lighting, he would stop or turn back within the first few hundred meters. Even if he continued, the model showed he could not cross sharp rocks and steep slopes without leaving biological or mechanical traces, while the 2009 search found no fresh scratches on rock surfaces in the western or northern regions. This strongly ruled out Ethan reaching the discovery location on his own. Additionally, when the analysis team reconstructed the vehicle's movement path in 3D based on undercarriage soil composition and final position, the model showed the vehicle traveled through terrain similar to the Cottonwood Ridge area, matching the rock dust found on evidence. This indicated the vehicle may have been driven through the southeast area, where evidence was scattered, before being abandoned at the discovery site. This analysis reinforced the hypothesis that the victim was transported by vehicle rather than moving on foot. Another critical piece came from analyzing micro-traces on Ethan's ribs. Forensic specialists identified mineral powder traces not belonging to Boynton Canyon stratigraphy. This composition matched southeast area rock dust, suggesting the victim was attacked or collapsed in that area before the body was moved to Boynton Canyon. This was the first time the analysis team had direct micro-evidence linking the southeast area to the victim, strengthening the initial incident location hypothesis. When comparing the skull impact force model with terrain structure, experts concluded the crack was incompatible with rockfall or high surface fall, as force distribution did not follow a natural fan pattern and the crack angle was too concentrated. The crack pattern was more consistent with direct blunt force. Combined with rib fractures and lack of personal items at the scene, this nearly completely ruled out natural accident. All data, when input into the 3D model, step-by-step identified the initial incident area, a region on the southeast axis, near where the fabric scrap and bottle cap were found, with rugged surface, shallow rock crevices, and characteristic mineral dust layers. This was where both force and movement models aligned. Micro-evidence on ribs, fabric scrap, and rock dust all pointed to this region. After synthesizing all modern forensic analyses, Marcus Hale concluded that the event leading to Ethan's death occurred in the southeast area of Red Mesa Sanctuary, not Boynton Canyon, and the body's discovery there could only result from human intervention movement. This officially completely ruled out natural accident and solidified the investigation direction that Ethan Marlowe became a victim of an assault on the night he vanished. After reconstructing the scene using modern forensic technology and identifying the southeastern area of Red Mesa Sanctuary as the likely location of the initial incident, Detective Marcus Hale shifted focus to examining indirect data sources that had been overlooked in 2009, particularly data from vehicles associated with individuals in the circle of suspicion. On this list, the truck belonging to Victor Sandoval's company became the central focus because at the time of Ethan's disappearance, it was the vehicle Sandoval regularly used to travel between Cottonwood and his work areas. In 2009, trucks of this type were equipped with basic GPS tracking devices for internal management purposes, but the investigating agency at the time did not request access because the case was not yet considered to have criminal elements. Marcus immediately sent a legal request to Sandoval's company to collect all GPS data stored in the vehicle management system. Fortunately, the system from that year was still periodically maintained, and most of the data had not been deleted. The company's technical department provided a copy of the movement data for the 3 months surrounding the time of Ethan's disappearance, including timestamps, coordinates, and vehicle status. Upon beginning the analysis, Marcus noticed an unusual appearance in the truck's travel route on the night of the disappearance. Instead of following the fixed route between Cottonwood and Sedona as usual, the GPS recorded the vehicle deviating from the familiar path about an hour before Claire reported Ethan missing and moving into the border area between Red Mesa Sanctuary and Cottonwood Ridge. This was precisely the area with mineral composition matching the dust sample adhered to the fabric fragment and evidence collected earlier. This route was not only unusual, but also did not match Sandoval's initial statement that he was at home that evening. Additionally, the truck was recorded as stopping for nearly 40 minutes at a location less than a mile from the initial incident area. This stop was not on any cargo transport route or company work route. Combining the GPS data with the 3D terrain simulation from the previous analysis, Marcus determined that the path the truck took that night overlapped with the dirt trail where the evidence had fallen. This led him to hypothesize that the vehicle may have been used to transport a person or object through the southeastern area at a time and location coinciding with the traces found. To further strengthen this, Marcus requested a physical inspection of the truck, which was still in the company garage and had not been replaced. When the technical team removed the underbody shield and sampled the soil stuck in the wheel wells, they discovered 2 layered soil types, a light brown soil corresponding to the Cottonwood area and a red dust characteristic of the Red Mesa region. Upon microanalysis, the experts determined that the red dust under the truck had a mineral composition matching the dust sample collected from the initial incident area and did not match the soil at the truck's usual parking location at all. Furthermore, the soil sample contained small amounts of fragmented hematite, a component only present in the transitional land strip between Red Mesa and Cottonwood Ridge, precisely the area suggested by the 2009 evidence. This ruled out the possibility of dust adhering to the truck from routine trips because Sandoval's truck had no reason to pass through that land in work activities. Marcus also requested analysis of dust samples taken from the truck's cabin floor. This sample also contained minerals similar to the microcomposition found on Ethan's fabric fragment, indicating that the cabin likely contained an object or person carrying dust from the southeastern area. This coincidence became even more notable when compared to Sandoval's statement that he was not near Red Mesa on the night Ethan disappeared. When cross-referencing all the data with the case timeline map, Marcus noted that Sandoval's truck movement began before Ethan was considered missing, passed through the central suspicion area, stopped in a location consistent with the evidence movement direction, and then continued on a route toward Cottonwood, completely matching the cell ping location from Ethan's phone. This connection further reinforced the hypothesis that the victim's phone had traveled with the vehicle on the night of the incident. With the GPS data showing the truck's presence at the initial incident area, soil samples under the truck and in the cabin matching the scene samples, and the route not aligning with Sandoval's legitimate work activities, Marcus Hale concluded that Sandoval was near the scene at the time of Ethan's disappearance. Although the exact purpose or sequence of events could not yet be determined, the GPS data and soil analysis became crucial links confirming that Sandoval's presence in the area was not coincidental and needed to be considered a central factor in the expanding criminal investigation direction. As the technical evidence began to converge on Victor Sandoval's presence in the southeastern area on the night Ethan disappeared, Detective Marcus Hale decided to return for supplemental statements from those who were at Red Mesa at the time, especially Vargas, the land manager, and the only person besides Claire who had direct contact with Ethan in the final hours before he vanished. In the new session, Marcus presented part of the analyzed data to confirm that the investigation was progressing seriously. and this caused Vargas to show clear signs of wavering compared to his 2009 statement. After a few minutes of hesitation, Vargas admitted that he had not fully disclosed what he knew due to fear of consequences, and that the night Ethan disappeared was not entirely quiet, as he had described. According to the supplemental statement, Vargas reported that on that evening, before Ethan left the house area, he heard sounds of an argument coming from the eastern yard, where Ethan often stood to breathe when he couldn't sleep. He did not hear the full words, but Ethan's voice and another male voice that Vargas affirmed was Sandoval's rang out for a few minutes. The argument content related to financial issues. Ethan mentioned ending control and going against the agreement, while the other voice responded with short, sharp, and threatening sentences. Vargas stated that after hearing a few such segments, he stepped out of the auxiliary house to see what was happening, but not wanting to be detected, he only stood from a distance in the shadows, seeing two figures standing facing each other. Although the dim light prevented him from clearly identifying facial details, the builds and postures made him certain it was Sandoval. Vargas said he had intended to approach closer, but when Ethan suddenly turned and walked toward the southeast in a tense state, Sandoval also backed away and headed toward his vehicle. A few minutes later, he heard the sound of an engine starting from the side gate leading to Cottonwood Ridge. However, what kept Vargas from reporting in 2009 was that the next day, when news of Ethan's disappearance spread, he received a short call from Sandoval. The caller did not explain anything, just said one sentence, "Don't get involved in things that aren't your business," then hung up. Vargas admitted that this message frightened him and made him think that any information he provided could endanger himself. Combined with the lack of concrete evidence at the time, he chose silence and only provided general information in a way that did not draw attention. When Marcus asked why he decided to tell the truth in 2021, Vargas said that seeing the investigation progressing with solid technical evidence made him believe the time to protect the truth was more appropriate. He also affirmed that his previous concerns about Sandoval had never diminished, and that was the reason he had remained silent for many years. With this supplemental statement, Marcus noted several important points: Sandoval's presence at Red Mesa right before Ethan vanished, the argument content related to finances, matching the previously analyzed financial records, and the threatening behavior toward Vargas after the incident. This was the first time a direct witness confirmed that Sandoval was around the area on the night of the disappearance, providing a crucial piece to clarify the motive and movement direction of the events that night. With Vargas's supplemental statement and the chain of technical evidence increasingly pointing to Victor Sandoval's role on the night Ethan disappeared, Detective Marcus Hale prepared the legal basis to request a comprehensive search warrant for Sandoval's residence and workplace. The court submission included GPS data showing Sandoval's truck appearing near the scene, microanalysis on the truck matching dust soil from the initial incident area, the new statement confirming the argument between Sandoval and the victim, along with inconsistencies in financial documents linked to Ethan's process of separating assets from Sandoval's control. When the search warrant was approved, the investigation team executed it the next morning to minimize the risk of evidence destruction. The first location was Sandoval's private home in Cottonwood, a spacious house with a large garage and separate office room. When the team approached and read the search warrant, Sandoval maintained a calm but uncooperative attitude, repeatedly asserting that he had nothing to do with the old disappearance case. However, this attitude did not affect the search process conducted according to procedure. In the garage, the investigators discovered a locked metal cabinet. After unlocking it with specialized tools, inside the cabinet appeared a small wooden box containing several raw and semi-crystal gemstones. When cross-referencing with Ethan's asset report, Marcus recognized that many stones in the box had shapes and colors matching the rare minerals Ethan had collected during his participation in small geological survey projects the previous year. Some stones even had old packaging with markings that Claire confirmed were the symbols Ethan commonly used to classify mineral samples. Finding these gemstones at Sandoval's home was not only unusual, but also contradicted his statement that he did not hold any physical assets of Ethan. This was recorded as important evidence and sealed immediately. In Sandoval's office room, the investigation team seized numerous documents related to financial transactions, including notebooks, printed emails, and adjusted reports with deleted headers or handwritten changes. When comparing these documents with copies stored in the bank system and 2009 company records, Marcus discovered many unreported modifications, such as lines adjusting signing times, changing asset priorities, and unusually fast transaction approvals when Ethan was trying to separate asset funds. Particularly, in some crumpled prints in the recycling bin, the investigation team found a draft of a transaction in which Sandoval planned to transfer a portion of Ethan's funds to an account not in the audit list. Although this draft was never executed, its appearance right in Sandoval's home was a significant sign of intent to interfere with the asset funds before Ethan disappeared. The forensic technical team also inspected Sandoval's truck once more, this time focusing on sampling microtraces in areas like door crevices, back seats, and deeper underbody sections. The dust samples obtained were sent to the lab for comparison with those previously collected at Red Mesa and Cottonwood Ridge. The analysis results showed clear similarity between the soil sample in the truck's door crevice and the soil at the southeastern initial incident area, including hematite mineral composition at a density characteristic only in the geological boundary between the two areas. This further reinforced that Sandoval's truck had traveled through the incident area, not just stopping where Ethan's vehicle was found. Additionally, in a personal belongings bag deep under the truck bed, the investigators discovered an old work glove dusted with red soil and a few tiny polyester fiber fragments. When analyzing and comparing these fiber samples with the fabric fragment sample collected at the 2009 scene, the results showed a match in fiber structure and tear degradation level. This was one of the most valuable microevidence as it directly linked the scene evidence to a personal item in Sandoval's truck. As the search team continued checking drawers in the office room, they discovered additional document stacks marked with pencil but partially erased. Under specialized lighting, the erased text parts faintly appeared, showing notes about transferring control and adjusting the list in the exact week of the incident. The fact that these documents were not in Sandoval's reported records raised questions about whether he had deliberately concealed adjustments related to Ethan's asset funds. Besides paper evidence, the search team also seized 2 pairs of work boots with soles adhered to red dust similar to the type with micro-minerals from the Red Mesa region. Although work boots often have soil, the match in micro-mineral composition was the point that led Marcus to request detailed analysis. The subsequent results showed that the dust on the sole of one of the 2 pairs contained proportions of hematite and magnetite minerals nearly identical to the sample from the southeastern area, meaning the area determined as the initial attack location. The combination of physical evidence, financial documents, soil samples, and microtraces obtained during the search significantly strengthened suspicions against Sandoval. Not only was he present at the initial incident area, Sandoval also possessed numerous pieces of evidence directly related to the victim and shady financial activities right before Ethan's disappearance. Seizing the gemstones belonging to Ethan, the altered financial documents, and the matching soil samples helped Marcus determine that the previously scattered elements were now connected into a strong evidence network sufficient to show a direct link between Sandoval and the disappearance, paving the way for the next steps in the investigation process. The 2022 trial opened in the context of the Ethan Marlowe case, having shifted from a missing person file lasting over 12 years to a criminal investigation with a tightly linked chain of evidence. The prosecutor began by presenting the entire sequence of events in chronological order to help the jury understand the continuity of the case. From the moment Ethan was reported missing in 2009, the initial search efforts that yielded no results, the evidence left unexamined due to technical limitations, to the reinvestigation process, after the skeletal remains were discovered in 2021. The prosecutor emphasized that the absence of a body at the initial time limited the investigation, but the discovery of the remains opened up opportunities to use modern forensic techniques. enabling scene reconstruction and identification of injury marks incompatible with natural accidents. From there, the prosecutor described the file's transformation from missing to suspected assault, a pivotal turning point showing that Ethan's death was not due to random causes. After the contextual summary, the prosecutor presented the technical evidence in groups. The first group was forensic evidence from the skeletal remains, cracks on the skull, impact force patterns, indicating the victim was likely attacked with a blunt object, and the body position incompatible with any natural travel route. The prosecutor used 3D image simulations to demonstrate that the body was placed in Boynton Canyon rather than dying there. Next was the group of evidence related to the 2009 physical items, fabric scraps, water bottle cap, dirt dust, and trace samples, all reanalyzed with new technology and showing a geological link between the southeast Red Mesa area and Cottonwood Ridge, where Ethan's vehicle was found. The prosecutor explained that the soil samples adhering to the fabric scrap and trace elements on the rib bones having characteristic mineral composition of the transition zone proved the victim was present or dragged through that area at the time of death. The third evidence group focused on GPS data from Sandoval's truck. The prosecutor presented the GPS log showing the truck deviating from its usual route, traveling to the area bordering Red Mesa on the exact night Ethan went missing, stopping for a duration long enough for a conflict or body transport to occur, then heading toward Cottonwood, matching the direction of Ethan's phone cell ping. GPS route simulation images were projected for the jury to clearly see the anomaly. The fourth evidence group consisted of items seized during searches of Sandoval's home and vehicle, gemstones owned by Ethan, altered financial documents, shoes with red dust matching the scene soil sample, and polyester fiber fragments matching the victim's torn fabric. The prosecutor stressed that the presence of these items could not be explained by coincidence or administrative error. After presenting the entire chain of evidence, the prosecutor wrapped up with the argument that Sandoval had both financial motive and opportunity to assault Ethan, and the technical evidence established Sandoval's presence in the incident area at the critical time. In turn, the defense focused on rebutting each technical point raised by the prosecutor to create reasonable doubt. They argued that cell tower data was not accurate enough to confirm Ethan's phone location due to weak signals and terrain deflection. For GPS, they contended that the 2009 system was imperfect, potentially recording incorrect coordinates due to signal loss or device errors. Regarding soil and dust samples, the defense claimed that the red soil of Red Mesa and Cottonwood Ridge had similar compositions and could not absolutely prove Sandoval's presence at the scene. When the prosecutor presented Ethan's gemstones found at Sandoval's home, the defense said Sandoval had been gifted samples by Ethan multiple times during their partnership, and keeping them was not unusual. Regarding the altered financial documents, the defense argued that the edits were merely personal drafts or incomplete internal processing documents without criminal intent. They tried to suggest that the polyester fibers and dust in the truck cabin could come from many sources because the vast desert environment allows easy dust dispersion. However, when the defense's rebuttal stream ended, the prosecutor called Vargas to the stand as a witness. This was seen as the trial's turning point. Vargas, the property manager, for the first time recounted in court witnessing the argument between Ethan and Sandoval on the night of the disappearance. Though he did not hear the full content, part of the dialogue involved Ethan wanting to end Sandoval's financial control, making the financial context clearer. Vargas also testified that the next morning he received a warning call to stay out of it, which the prosecutor claimed was witness intimidation. The defense tried to undermine Vargas's credibility by asking why he did not report this in 2009 and suggesting his memory might be distorted over time. But Vargas explained he feared retaliation because Sandoval had financial power and wide connections, and his silence was due to feeling threatened, not hiding the truth. This testimony drew the jury's attention because it aligned with the previously presented technical data and physical evidence. After Vargas's testimony, the prosecutor reaffirmed the evidence chain's connectivity argument at Red Mesa, signal movement to Cottonwood, matching GPS and soil samples, altered financial documents, and victim-owned items found at Sandoval's home, all connected into a consistent logical sequence, while the defense failed to provide any reasonable alternative scenario. The trial entered the deliberation phase in a situation where context, motive, opportunity, and technical evidence all converged into a chain of events constituting criminal liability, making Sandoval's role in the incident no longer a vague suspicion, but the core of the prosecutor's argument. As the trial entered the deliberation phase, the jury took the entire evidence file, testimonies, and technical analyses to assess Victor Sandoval's degree of involvement in Ethan Marlowe's death. After many hours of closed discussion, they returned to the courtroom with clear expressions of consistency in their judgment. The verdict read in court affirmed Sandoval's guilt based on a chain of evidence that could not be explained by a reasonable innocent scenario. The jury evaluated that the physical evidence from soil samples on the truck polyester fibers matching the torn fabric, gemstones owned by the victim found at Sandoval's home, and altered financial documents all formed a network proving Sandoval's presence and intervention on the night Ethan went missing. They stated that Sandoval's truck appearing in the incident area, along with the unusual stop signs and matching between undercarriage soil and the attack area, was direct evidence showing he participated in transporting the victim or body. Additionally, Vargas's testimony about the argument between Ethan and Sandoval, plus the threat he received the next day, served as supplementary evidence to establish motive and the defendant's attitude close to the incident. From these factors, the jury concluded that Sandoval intentionally caused Ethan's death to protect financial interests and avoid losing control over the asset fund. Based on legal classification, the prosecutor proposed charging Sandoval with murder of a serious degree, along with 2 additional charges of fraud related to manipulating the victim's finances and tampering with evidence due to interfering with the scene, moving the body, and concealing Ethan's property. The court considered each charge based on the presented evidence and testimonies, determining that Sandoval's actions not only caused the victim's death, but also prolonged the case's impasse for many years. In the sentencing portion, the judge stated that Sandoval's level of interference with the case facts was serious, causing harm not only to the victim, but also significant disruption to the authorities' investigation process. The court sentenced Sandoval to second-degree murder, with a high sentence due to the intentional causation of death and the sophistication in concealment. For the fraud charge, the court determined that Sandoval used financial control to gain illicit profits and conceal unauthorized adjustments to prevent Ethan from separating assets. The tampering with evidence charge was confirmed through moving the body, abandoning the victim's vehicle far from the actual scene, and storing non-owned property to create a false scene and confuse the investigation. The total sentence was 40 years imprisonment, with Sandoval required to bear additional civil liability related to the financial losses of the Ethan Marlowe Fund. The case file was completed and archived according to Coconino County procedures as a case fully resolved after over a decade of ambiguity. With the sentence issued, the court declared the case closed, transferring the file to final archiving, marking the official end of a lengthy and complex investigative journey. After the sentence for Victor Sandoval was pronounced and the Ethan Marlowe case file was officially closed, the Coconino County Investigative Agency, along with Arizona DPS, conducted a full summary of the entire case handling process to evaluate errors in the initial investigation phase and draw practical lessons for missing person cases in the state's vast desert areas. The internal evaluation report pointed out that in 2009, due to the lack of a body and technological limitations, the investigative force did not have sufficient basis to open a criminal file, despite many unusual signs. Physical evidence analysis was very limited. Soil samples, rock dust, and fabric scraps were not analyzed for trace minerals, leading to missing the geological link between the actual scene and suspected areas. Additionally, GPS data from related vehicles was not reviewed, even though the system had basic log storage capability. The file also noted that Ethan's phone cell tower data was undervalued due to weak signals, without applying terrain simulation or cross-referencing with coverage maps, causing the Cottonwood direction to be eliminated too early. Another key error was the investigative agency not seeking search warrants immediately upon detecting inconsistencies in Sandoval's statements, mainly because there was no direct evidence of criminal elements at the time. The lack of experience in handling missing person cases in vast desert areas, combined with reliance on traditional search methods, left many scattered traces unconnected. From these limitations, Arizona DPS proposed reforming the missing person handling process in desert environments, emphasizing parallel criminal investigation from the early stage if any unusual behavioral or financial signs exist. A new standard set was established, requiring mandatory trace analysis of physical evidence instead of surface analysis. GPS from all vehicles within the relevant radius must be retrieved from day one, regardless of criminal signs. Cell tower data must be evaluated using terrain models rather than just signal strength. The investigative agency also introduced new witness statement management requirements. All statements need cross-verification through timeline analysis to detect minor discrepancies, as those discrepancies once led to overlooking the Cottonwood direction in the Ethan case. Simultaneously, new regulations require assessing witness intimidation risks in small communities or cases with large financial factors, to avoid repeating the situation where Vargas stayed silent for years due to fear. From a training perspective, Arizona DPS decided to include the Ethan Marlowe case in the official training program as a standard case study, emphasizing how scattered elements, fabric scraps, soil dust, weak cell pings, changes in asset funds, and unusual GPS routes, when analyzed with modern technology and placed in a multi-layered contextual link, can become an evidence chain establishing the entire criminal process. The report concluded that if these new standards had been applied from 2009, many key traces would not have been missed, and the case could have been resolved many years earlier. However, the final reinvestigation results also proved the high case-solving capability of modern forensics when applied correctly. The Ethan Marlowe case thus became a typical example of Arizona's change in approaching missing person cases in desert environments, helping authorities standardize handling methods and improve truth detection in complex, long-drawn cases. The story of the Ethan Marlowe case is not just an investigative journey lasting over 12 years, but also reflects very real issues in American life today. The dangers of vast desert regions, the importance of financial transparency and power relationships, and the life-saving value of reporting the truth from the start. In this case, initial errors, such as undervaluing weak cell pings, not retrieving Sandoval's truck GPS, or Vargas's silence due to fear, all contributed to prolonging the impasse. We can clearly see that in a country with vast natural areas like the United States, a person's disappearance cannot rely solely on intuition or traditional search measures. The application of technology, from LiDAR to trace analysis, played a decisive role in clarifying the case. This reminds us that in modern life, technology is not just a convenience, but a tool to protect transparency and justice. Another important point is the victim's financial changes, the adjustments in the asset fund, and lack of transparency from Sandoval became part of the crime's motive. In the United States, where many people invest, manage assets, or rely on financial advisors, this case is a reminder to always monitor accounts, keep full records, and be vigilant about unusual changes. Finally, the story shows the harm of silence. If Vargas had reported the argument from the beginning, the investigation direction might have been different. In life, this emphasizes the importance of speaking up when witnessing something unusual, even when it feels uncomfortable, because sometimes a small piece of information can save a life or bring the truth to light many years earlier. Thank you for following this case-solving journey spanning over a decade. If you found the story useful and want to see more cases analyzed in depth like this, please hit subscribe to join us. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring the hidden corners of mysterious cases across America.